The Prime Minister will be urged to launch a new national inquiry into grooming gangs in a report due next week, directly linking the issue to men of Pakistani origin, which even saying that probably makes me racist. In any case, the findings from Baroness Casey's months-long audit will warn that white British girls were ignored due to fears of racism. Despite resistance from Sir Keir Starmer, who says another inquiry would delay justice, a report suggests the findings will call for a fresh investigation into the perpetrator's race and claims of a cover-up. Well, we have the expert on this story, a man that has done brilliant work on it, covered it from day one, and that is GB News national reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, once again, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone for the work you've done on this. Where are we now? What does this mean?
Well, a few years ago, GB News published a report that said over 50 different towns and cities had been affected by this scourge in recent decades. Now, after we put that out, the then government, which was under the command of Rishi Sunak, launched a grooming gangs task force. It's made well over 1,000 arrests since April 2023. But in this new administration under a Labour government, they have resisted calls since January for a national inquiry into the grooming gang scandal. They've done so because they say that localised inquiries are more effective. They point to the Telford model, because Telford had a review published in 2022, which found over 1,000 victims over a few decades. They've also said that we've already had an inquiry, the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, which was published in 2017. However, that review did not look sufficiently, some say, into the grooming gang scandal. It looked at just 6 areas, not the vast number it should have, with the 50 areas that we have highlighted,
exactly,
for
yes.
example. I should say that was actually published in 22, not 2017, sorry. However, it does look now, based on reports we're seeing in newspapers, that Baroness Casey's report is going to call for a national inquiry into the grooming gang scandal. We don't know what the government reaction to that will be. They could fudge it. They could say, no, we don't need this. We're standing by what we've argued for the last 6 months. We need more localised inquiries, as they've argued for. I can say now that survivors have been contacted by the Safeguarding Minister, Jess Phillips, this morning. Some victims of grooming gangs have got in touch with me today to say that that minister from the Home Office has engaged with them to say that they will be announcing new actions next week.
Right, OK.
So it's the first we're hearing about what's coming up. New actions will be coming next week, guided, I'm told, as Jess Phillips has told one person I'm in correspondence with, by testimony they've given to ministers. I know that many survivors have been meeting with the Home Office team, particularly Jess Phillips, in the last 6 months. Some of those survivors have been actually introduced to the Home Office by GB News. We've facilitated those introductions so that more testimony can be heard by Home Office ministers. But I am hearing now from some of those survivors that Jess Phillips has been in touch to say there will be new actions. We don't know what those new actions will be.
What the action is
we
the
don't know
important
what it will
thing here.
be. And it will really rely on what Baroness Casey says, because they announced this rapid audit in January, in the middle of that month, after 2 weeks of really relentless pressure with Conservatives, the Reform Party, Elon Musk, many other influential public figures also calling for a national inquiry into this grooming gang scandal. Because we've had so many public inquiries over the last decade or so. Infected blood. There's been an inquiry launched into Lucy Letby. We're going to have an inquiry into the Nottingham tragedy from a few years ago. But this issue, for one reason or another, it's always escaped that level of statutory investigation.
I think we all know what the reason is, though, don't we, Charlie?
Precisely.
But, I mean, we really do.
But perhaps there could be more reasons that we don't know that would be uncovered by a statutory investigation. Perhaps it would reveal, beyond what we're hearing from this report today, that there are fears of racism preventing investigation. I've always said, and I really do think this goes a bit further than that, actually. This isn't just about political correctness and people fearing them being seen as racist. I think there is corruption and mistakes there, but also collusion. What I'm really interested in being discovered and being revealed and being investigated by public bodies is collusion between public authorities, those in positions of authority, and abusers. And I also want to see an investigation into organised crime groups and grooming gangs, because last month, as we were waiting for Baroness Casey's, what was meant to be a rapid audit, which has turned into a 6-month audit.
6 months.
As we were waiting for that to come back, we published our own sort of national audits. We found hundreds of convictions since the early noughties, but we also found 0 deportations since 2011, and we found and published for the first time an extremely extensive network analysis showing how many of these individual towns and groups were actually connected.
I remember
the
seeing your map, Charlie, was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, we should have made those red lines a bit thinner. There were so many.
There were so many.
You
It was like a
almost couldn't see the map.
No.
That needs to be investigated. So Baroness Casey, we're hearing from these reports. It's been claimed that she's going to make this stance about fears of racism. Frankly, I have to say we already know about that. That's already been revealed in Casey's own report in Rotherham in 2015, when she looked at that town in particular. Any national inquiry needs to go further if it is to be launched, if this government does commission one on the back of this recommendation. It needs to look at the nitty-gritty, the really, truly awful parts of this. And I have to say, I've also heard this morning from Jane Senior, the Rotherham whistleblower, the woman who exposed the scandal, working with Andrew Norfolk, the now sadly deceased Times reporter. She said, I love that woman, Baroness Casey. I knew she would do us all right. That's what Jane Senior told me on it today, because she was looking back on this morning, reflecting on the work that Louise Casey did in Rotherham in 2015, when she said that there was still an institutional cover-up in Rotherham. It hadn't accepted the findings of Alexis Jay's report in the town a year prior. Baroness Casey has done what I was hoping she would do, it seems, which is to be very direct, very rigid on this, and to call it out for what it is.
So surely, Charlie, Keir Starmer has to now go for the follow the recommendation when he gets back from the G7 leaders meeting on Wednesday, I believe it is. He has to open a national inquiry, surely.
Forget Winterfield. Yeah, it's a mess, if that's what's required. I mean, forget Winterfield, forget his meeting with Donald Trump, all the other political hurdles he's had to jump over since he came to power last July. I think this coming week could be the most difficult period of his premiership, because PMQs is on Wednesday. We know that also on Wednesday afternoon, the Conservatives have tabled an amendment to vote on another national inquiry into the grooming gang scandal. That's going to be an amendment to the policing and crime bill. If it comes to the case where on Monday, Baroness Casey puts out reports saying we need this inquiry, if they don't announce one by Wednesday and the Tories then have this vote which Labour MPs don't call for, it would be an absolute mess, So there has been some change in tone since January. Even though Sir Keir Starmer and the front bench have consistently said they're against another national inquiry, I say an inquiry, there has been some murmurs of taking a step back and saying, if Casey calls for one, we'll do that. Jake Richards, who's now the MP for Rother Valley, he said we'll have to listen very carefully to what Casey says. That's what he told our political editor, Christopher Hope. Paul Waugh, the Labour MP for Rochdale, very late last night, said on the back of the 7 men convicted in Manchester Crown Court yesterday, he said, I said I was open to a national inquiry, now I'm calling for one. Sarah Champion, who is the MP for Rotherham and has been now for a very long time, since 2015, she is also been calling for a national inquiry since January. Dan Carden, a Labour MP in Liverpool, he's also called for one. I think now we could see a wider number of Labour MPs take that step.
Because briefly, Charlie, we know this is still going on. Girls are suffering.
Yes, and it's been exposed by the CSE task force launched by Suella Braverman, still making thousands of arrests. This issue never went away. And because there's never been a rigorous analysis of its causes, of its drivers, and the impact it leaves to people, I think policing has not learned the lessons from those past failures exposed in towns right across the country.
OK. Charlie, thank you very much. I just want to finish talking to you, Charlie, by reading that court case you mentioned where a grooming gang were found guilty of raping girls over several years. I want to read you one little piece of evidence from girl A. And she said she thought it was normal to have sex with at least 30 men by the age of 13. And estimated she may have been abused by as many 200 men. She said, I thought it was normal. I didn't realise it was abuse at the time. This girl was in the care of local social services. She was accused of being a prostitute. She was 13 years old. Charlie Peters, thank you so much for that. Done a sterling job on this, and we will await with bated breath as to what the government do on Wednesday. OK, now joining me now to discuss this further is social policy analyst Rake Essen. Rake, thank you so much for joining. Rake, I mean, you've just heard what Charlie's had to say. Obviously, we're aware that the court case that finalised and the girls involved in that. What do you make of what Baroness Casey has reported, and what do you expect to happen?
Well, Dawn, for me, I've been saying for some time that we need a well-funded, comprehensive national statutory inquiry into the grooming gangs. The plans that the Labour government put in place were wholly insufficient. These locally led inquiries, 5 inquiries, that would only represent 1/10 of the 50 towns and cities which have been identified by the work done by your very own Charlie Peters.
Yes.
So this would have been a superficial investigation at best. And I think one of the important things here is determining public sector accountability for the gross institutional failures connected to the grooming gangs. And I don't think you'll be able to achieve that unless it is a national statutory inquiry, which has the ability to compel witnesses to attend those public proceedings and to take evidence under oath.
Well, that was the problem with the local inquiries, was that there's no statutory requirements to them. You know, it's like marking your own homework and say, yeah, people were bad,
Exactly.
and it moves on. So, I mean, what do you think Keir Starmer will do this week, though? I mean, if Baroness Casey is calling for a national inquiry, I mean, Keir Starmer is in real trouble if he refuses to hold one.
Well, but Baroness Casey is a highly respected figure across our political parties. I think the Prime Minister will find himself in the right pickle if she directly calls for a national statutory inquiry into grooming gang activity. I think the issue here is that much of this horrific abuse, and if I'm being honest, Dawn, we're talking about forms of sexual violence, they wouldn't be out of place in a war zone. If I'm being absolutely honest.
Honestly, yeah, the details of some of the court cases and some of the testimonies of the girls that have spoken and their families that have spoken to Charlie Peters, it's horrific. It is beyond horrific.
Absolutely. And I think the point we have to make is that much of this has taken place in areas which are traditionally Labour-controlled local authorities. So I think that it's time for the Labour Prime Minister to really step up to the plate. If Baroness Casey calls for a national statutory inquiry, that is what he should organise.
And, I mean, how much... I mean, look, we know it's still going on, Rake. We know this is still happening in towns up and down the country. And politicians are... You know, this was meant to be a quick inquiry. 6 months on, how many girls have been abused in that 6 months? We don't know. We possibly never will do. But, I mean, I just find it shocking that politicians are playing with girls' lives here.
No, absolutely. And I think that what we also have to bear in mind is that there are various accounts which very much suggest that public institutions, they were fearful of properly investigating grooming gang activity for fears of being accused of racism, religiously connected prejudice. But ultimately what they have to be reminded of is that duty of care to the most vulnerable members of society. And we're talking about victims here. If you look at the research, Dawn, disproportionately in the care system, a breaking care system, and also disproportionately suffering from disabilities as well.
Yeah.
We're talking about predatory enterprises here. And as Charlie has mentioned, much of this activity was very much localised. But if you look at the networks, the connections, they go beyond one particular local area. So that's why I think it's very important that we have a thorough national public investigation into group localised child sexual exploitation.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's Rake Essen, always the voice of reason on this. Thank you very much for joining us, Rake. Let me know what you think. gbnews.com/your say. We have reached out for the Home Office for comment and we will bring you their response when we get it. Obviously, it's a Saturday afternoon.